The collapse of reality. Right at this moment, Arthur's exhausted brain was desperately clinging to every word of the old doctor to anchor itself to reality, completely forgetting a terrifying truth, which was that this very brain was the same machine that just last night had single-handedly molded an entire vivid world out of nothingness. Arthur sat with his knees drawn up opposite Dr. Julian Thorne inside a quiet, pine-shaded wooden cabin in the mountains of Big Sur, a place he had sought out as a final sanctuary to escape the sheer exhaustion and brutal panic attack that had just consumed him in the chaotic center of San Francisco. The software architect's hands were still trembling as he tried to describe that horrifying moment, the moment when everything around him, from the towering skyscrapers to the rushing crowds, suddenly lost its familiar solidity and shattered into disjointed fragments, drifting through space like soulless, meaningless lines of code. He thought he was losing his mind when the wall of perception collapsed right in the middle of a crowded coffee shop, leaving behind a primal fear and utter bewilderment about whether anything out there truly existed. Listening to those choked confessions, Dr. Julian did not offer the usual empty words of comfort, nor did he tell Arthur to take a deep breath or try to think positively, but merely offered a gentle smile tinged with the calmness of someone who had seen through the mind's illusions. With an unhurried demeanor, the former quantum physicist slowly poured a hot cup of tea and pushed it toward the struggling young man, then raised his warm, deep voice to begin gently peeling back the veils of illusion, slowly revealing a profound and miraculous truth about how our own brain, and not the outside world, is acting as both director and audience for the grand play of reality that we firmly believe every day to be an objective truth. The old doctor's warm voice resonated steadily, blending with the sound of the wind howling through the pine canopy outside the window like a quiet background melody, guiding Arthur deep into the astonishing hidden corners of neurobiology. He asked the young man to close his eyes to feel his own existence, and then gently reminded him of a harsh truth, which was that our grand central command brain is actually floating all alone inside a dark skull, absolutely blind and deaf to the outside world. The scholar explained that the brilliant golden rays of the sunset reflecting on the wooden walls, or even the radiating warmth from the teacup in Arthur's hand right now, absolutely do not exist in that physical world out there in the way we always believe. Instead, they are merely invisible internal labels generated and attached by the brain to help us easily categorize and recognize the electromagnetic signals and biochemical reactions transmitting through the neural network. The vibrantly colored world out there does not touch us directly, but rather that deaf and blind organ is constantly guessing and painting the picture of reality even before the senses can register the information, a sophisticated survival mechanism that science explains through the concept of predictive processing. The brain does not obediently wait for information to come in to react, but instead acts like a prophet, constantly projecting images, sounds, and sensations onto the blank canvas of consciousness, continuously adjusting them with the meager scraps of data collected from the senses. With a voice steeped in empathy, Julian affirmed that the waking reality Arthur always tried to cling to was actually just a form of hallucination tightly controlled by input data. The moment the architect's wall of perception collapsed in the heart of the noisy city was not a sign that he was going crazy or losing his mind, but simply the moment his internal prediction machine was overloaded by chaotic streams of information, leading to the inability to continue maintaining the perfect daily illusion. That overload birthed an extreme anxiety, much like a piercing alarm siren when the brain struggles to match familiar predictions with a fractured reality. We often identify ourselves with that panic, believing that the shattering of our worldview equates to our own destruction. But here, amid the quiet space of this mountain, that collapse transforms into a wonderful opportunity to step back and observe. Instead of frantically resisting or trying to patch up the unfinished play, the doctor advised Arthur to try viewing that disorientation with pure curiosity, like an audience member admiring the cluttered backstage of a theater right after the velvet curtain has fallen. Relief began to weave its way into Arthur's mind as he realized he did not have to bear the burden of fixing a broken world, but only needed to learn to understand how the dream-weaving machine inside his skull operated. The hallucination he had always called life was not working against him, it was merely trying its best to protect his fragile existence from the chaos of an invisible and silent universe. Upon shaking off the agonizing burden of having to cling to the absolute authenticity of all things, the young man felt the heartbeat in his chest gradually slow down, rhythmically harmonizing with the gentle breath of the earth and sky. That moment of grace was like a soothing dose of first aid that comforted his bleeding soul, helping him become ready to face the deeper philosophical abysses churning ahead without being suffocated by the cruel shadow of madness. The solipsistic abyss. The relief that had just crept into Arthur's mind had not yet taken deep root when another sudden chill ran down his spine as a sharp thought tore through the silence of the wooden room, fragrant with the scent of dry pine. If everything from the radiant sunset to the warmth of the teacup was merely a rendered product of the closed prediction machine inside his skull, then what could guarantee the genuine existence of the living beings he always loved? The delicate face of Clara, the life partner who always caringly accompanied him, appeared vividly in his mind with her familiar gentle smile and sparkling eyes, but now that beloved image carried a suffocatingly haunting phantom. Arthur floundered, wondering if this entire world was an internal blueprint molded by his own brain. Then how could he know that behind Clara's clear eyes there truly was a flowing inner world? Did she truly feel agonizing sorrow when shedding tears, or feel surging joy when smiling, or was she just a perfectly programmed biological machine responding to stimuli from the surrounding environment? That this extreme bewilderment struck directly into his consciousness as a thorny concept that Dr. Julian Thorne, with his usual calm voice, called a philosophical zombie, an entity with an appearance and behavior indistinguishable from a normal human but completely empty on the inside, possessing no subjective experience whatsoever. The old scholar slowly placed his teacup on the table, his eyes flashing with deep contemplation as he began guiding the young architect to face the formidable problem of consciousness, a vertical cliff where all the efforts of modern science helplessly grind to a halt. Neuroscience can map every neuron, scan every electroencephalogram, and thoroughly explain how the brain processes information or reacts to physical agents, but remains completely silent before the question of why those dry biochemical reactions give birth to vivid subjective feelings inside every human being. Julian gently emphasized that we do not have any consciousness measuring machine in this world to confirm whether a system is truly feeling or not. There is no magical thermometer to plug into another person's mind and measure whether the lights are on inside the biological shell, or if it is merely a cold, soulless darkness devoid of the flame of awareness. We only ever observe from the outside and naively assume by default that those around us also have a rich inner life just like our own, based on the similarity in physical structure and predictable behavioral patterns. That harsh truth was like a blade stripping away Arthur's final anchor, pushing him into a free fall down the abyss of solipsism, where the darkness of the most absolute and primal loneliness began to besiege his weary mind. That the overwhelming sensation of realizing he might be the only island of consciousness drifting amidst an unfeeling universe made him feel as if he were suffocating, because if every smile, every embrace, and every word of comfort from Clara or anyone else were just soulless streams of information echoing back from a grand reflex machine, then the entire meaning of love and human connection seemed to be nothing but a tragic monologue he was performing with the very illusion he created. The space in the cabin seemed to thicken under the weight of this cosmic scale solitude, but the old doctor was in no rush to speak to dispel the gloomy atmosphere weighing heavily on the young man's shoulders. He allowed that terrifying thought to slowly seep deep into Arthur's every cell, because he understood that only by bravely looking straight into the very bottom of the abyss of doubt can a person find the path to escape the prison of illusion and reach a deeper level of awareness about the self and the miraculous connection of all things. The silence at this moment was not a dead end but a necessary meditative void for Arthur's mind to digest the ultimate limits of perception before he was ready to receive the next reality-altering perspectives. The absurdity of the ego, the atmosphere, thick with primal loneliness that was on the verge of crushing Arthur's mind, suddenly shifted when the old doctor gently cleared his throat, pulling the young man back to the reality of the wooden cabin with a journey back in time to the 17th century. With a slow, enchanting storytelling rhythm, Julian brought Arthur into a quiet small room in Germany, where the philosopher René Descartes once sat by a fireplace and decided to conduct the most audacious thought experiment in human history, which was to doubt absolutely everything. Layer after layer of reality was ruthlessly stripped away by the philosopher, because the senses are inherently full of deceit, and dreams can be so remarkably authentic that they entirely deceive human consciousness. The magnificent physical world out there could be a play of illusions, the people around might just be elaborately constructed ghosts, and even mathematics or logic could be a trap set by a cunning entity to manipulate. When the blade of doubt whittled down to the very end, tearing apart every most deeply rooted belief, Descartes fell to the bottom of the abyss and found only one single anchor that could not be refuted, which was the very act of doubting. The declaration "I think therefore I am" became the final fortress of perception, a cold truth locking human beings inside a narrow inner world where we can only be certain of our own presence and remain forever blind to everything around us. That was exactly the desperate trap of solipsism where Arthur was struggling, an inescapable maze where the existence of Clara or anyone else became an unprovable hypothesis. However, right at the moment the darkness of doubt rose to his neck, the architect heard a soft laugh that shattered the gloomy fog. Dr. Julian Thorne suddenly shook off his usual contemplative demeanor, his eyes flashing with a mischievous and deeply sarcastic look that bore the bold signature of a true philosophical entertainer. With a sharply witty voice, he gently questioned the young man cowering in the chair, asking that if the boy were truly the only mind creating this entire universe, if everything were just a play where he wrote the script and directed it, then why would he torture himself with such long, exhausting days? He pointed out the hilariously absurd nature of Arthur's fear, because if he were the sole almighty creator of reality, what reason would he have to lock himself in a suffocating San Francisco, inventing suffocating project schedules for himself, or sending himself dozens of stressful worked emails in the middle of the night? The doctor smiled and shook his head, leisurely passing judgment that if Arthur was playing the game of a lord of reality, then he was truly a very terrible lord with a pitifully impoverished imagination. That deeply wise joke acted as an instant antidote injected straight into the veins of anxiety, piercing the gray balloon of solipsism with the needle of the most naked and ordinary truth. Profound wisdom does not always wear a stern face, sometimes it arrives in the form of a hearty laugh at the absurdity of one's own mind. The tension in Arthur's chest suddenly burst into a long sigh of relief as he realized the stubbornly resistant nature of the outside world. No matter what the nature of reality might be, the truth that life always remains beyond control, always bringing troublesome surprises and unpredictable pains, was vivid living proof that this universe was vastly larger and much more complex than a monotonous monologue of the cerebral cortex. The heavy boulder pressing on the young man's shoulders dissolved, giving way to a sheepish smile as he mocked the very megalomaniacal illusion that had almost drowned him, paving the way for his mind to reach a fresh empathy regarding how we truly connect with those around us without needing to cling to any absolute verification that the evolution of empathy. The sheepish smile still lingered on Arthur's lips as he gradually shook off the megalomaniacal illusion known as solipsism, and the old doctor continued to gently rotate the lens, bringing him face to face with another equally miraculous mystery, which was how we perceive love. Julian slowly mentioned Clara and the way the architect's heart always tightened whenever he saw her sad, or the warm feeling surging when receiving a caring gesture from her hands. In common perception, we always believe that such empathy is a miracle directly connecting two souls, allowing us to perfectly clairvoyantly see everything happening inside the one we love. Yet the erudite scholar methodically peeled away that romantic shell to expose a much more pragmatic and raw root through a concept in evolutionary psychology known as theory of mind. That he explained that the ability to read the emotions of others was not born out of some lofty philosophical need, but was originally a sharp survival tool forged over millions of years on the harsh deserts of the primeval dawn. Our ancestors were forced to develop an ability for lightning-fast deduction to judge whether an approaching creature carried intentions of cooperation or the murderous aura of an enemy. The brain ingeniously constructed an automatic predictive model, to the point that upon seeing a frown or a radiant smile, we instantly feel the internal state of the other person, forgetting that this is entirely just a deduction, a probabilistic sketch calculated in a blink of an eye, and not a direct invasion into their consciousness. This explanation might initially sound coldly cruel by stripping away the mystical beauty of empathy, but Julian, with a voice brimming with tolerance, pointed out that this very realization was what brought ultimate liberation. When Arthur understood that the barrier between minds was an inviolable biological boundary, he would no longer torment himself with the question of how to know for sure what Clara was thinking or feeling. The truth is that we can never eternally see through anyone's mind, and all efforts demanding absolute proof of the existence of another soul are merely a hopeless forcing that brings endless suffering. Having shed the pressure of needing to thoroughly understand the inner world of others, the young man suddenly felt his chest become light, as if he had just dropped a burden of 1,000 pounds. That he realized that love and connection did not require us to shatter the skull to merge into one, but simply to learn to cherish the caring signals transmitted through that wall. Accepting the untouchable void between minds does not render empathy artificial, but conversely, it turns every moment of understanding into a miracle of effort, a precious gift born from the evolutionary process so that solitary biological machines can lean on each other amidst a vast, cold universe. That the quantum dance freed from the agonizing burden of having to forcibly measure the depth of another person's consciousness. Arthur felt the space seemingly expand as he and the old doctor stepped out of the quiet wooden cabin, taking a stroll along the foggy Big Sur coastline. The murmuring waves carrying the salty taste of the ocean seemed to wash away the remaining remnants of anxiety in the young architect's mind, yet Julian Thorne understood that the root of his exhaustion was still planted deep in another flawed belief about the nature of reality. Walking slowly on the damp sand, the former quantum physicist decided to change course, shifting the lens from biology to quantum physics to extinguish the obsession with an objective material world. Since childhood, we have always been indoctrinated with a classical mechanical worldview, where the universe is like a giant cold machine, matter is just matter, a rock remains forever a rock, and a mountain still stands towering there regardless of whether anyone is admiring it or not. However, with a knowing subtle smile blending with the howling sea wind, the scholar began recounting the double-slit experiment, a milestone that shook the foundation of 20th century science. He described the laboratory scene when scientists shot tiny particles of matter through a barrier with two narrow slits, and if no one placed a detector to track which slit the particle went through, they behaved like spreading water waves, interfering with themselves and creating a stretched-out pattern of bands on the screen behind. But the moment someone placed an observing device there to measure their path, all that quantum blurriness instantly vanished. The ghostly wave particles suddenly shrank, obediently becoming solid material marbles passing through exactly one of those two slits. That an earth-shattering truth was laid bare in the light of modern science, which is that the act of observation alters the state of matter. This revelation delivered a powerful blow to Arthur's expanding consciousness, shattering the rigid boundary between the observer and the observed object. This universe is not an independent stage with pre-built scenery and glaring lights merely waiting for humans to step up and perform their small survival roles. Reality at its deepest level is not indifferent or dismissive of the presence of consciousness, but rather it responds, bending to the way we choose to interact and measure. Amidst the vast expanse of the earth and sky, the concept of a cold, indifferent world existing independently from Arthur began to crumble. He gradually realized that his prolonged exhaustion stemmed from constantly bracing himself to fight against and manipulate a supposedly solid objective reality that inherently never existed in the way he had mistakenly believed. The barrier wall separating the fragile small ego inside and the grand massive physical world outside was slowly melting into the ocean fog, opening up a fresh, overwhelming, yet profoundly liberating stream of awareness, preparing to guide the young man into a grand quantum play where he was no longer an aimlessly drifting victim but was about to recognize his own sacred role in the endeavor of architecting the miraculous picture of the immense universe. That the architect of reality, the ocean waves, still murmured against the cliffs, as if playing the eternal symphony of nature, while Dr. Julian Thorne continued leading the young architect deeper into the miraculous maze of perception by presenting the paradox of Wigner's friend and interpreting it through Bayesian quantum theory, also known as QBism. He gently conjured the image of a scientist sealed inside a laboratory who had just completed a quantum measurement and saw a definite result, while another friend standing outside the door remained completely unaware. Thus, for the person inside, reality had distinctly settled, but for the person outside, that entire room, including the colleague, was still floating in a superimposed state of countless unresolvable possibilities. With a gentle smile, the scholar emphasized the core message of this paradox, that physics does not describe the world, it merely encodes the beliefs and expectations of the observer. There is no omniscient perspective of God to judge who is right or wrong, because quantum mechanics is not a map redrawing the universe. but rather just a personal notebook recording our predictions about the experience about to unfold before our eyes. That profoundly insightful explanation was like an emergency psychological first aid lesson watering Arthur's withered soul, as he connected all his suffering and realized that his pressures and exhaustion originated from forcing himself to conform to a single objective reality. For many years, he had crucified his life to the rigid standards of the daily grind, to suffocating deadlines and predefined successes dictated by society, forgetting a brilliantly radiant truth that reality is inherently personal. The brutal panic attack that struck him down in the middle of the crowded coffee shop was not the shattering of any solid material world, but simply his world collapsing because his expectations were collapsing, and he had the right to update that state. Like an observer just receiving new information from the environment, Arthur could completely rewrite the belief equation of his life, resetting his expectations and choosing for himself a freer lens of experience instead of continuing to carry the burden of an illusory picture that was cracking from overload. A sigh of relief gradually chased away the dark clouds in the young man's chest as he realized he was no longer a prisoner kept in a cruel and indifferent mechanical world, but a living being overflowing with freedom, personally sculpting the story of his own reality with every heartbeat of perception and the purest of anticipations. The liberation from the burden of rigid expectations seemed to open up a clear space in Arthur's mind, allowing the old doctor to continue guiding him deep into John Wheeler's concept of it from bit. Julian softly picked up a smooth pebble on the sand, dropped it into the rippling water, and explained that at the deepest layer of reality, all things are not made up of solid particles, but of information, or more precisely, of the answers to the queries that the observer poses to nature. This carried an earth-shattering philosophical significance, for it affirmed that there was no universe sitting idly waiting for Arthur to come and experience it. There was no unfeeling stage pre-set out there, just waiting for a human to step onto it to judge or endure, but on the contrary, the universe was born from the very questions he posed to it through the act of living. Every glance, every touch, every decision of his was a query sent into the endless void, and reality was exactly the answer woven from those pixels of information. This blindingly brilliant realization was like a warm ray of light piercing the cold night of hopelessness, because in that moment, Arthur was handed back his power. He realized he had entirely escaped the dark solitude, for he was not a lost victim in an illusory world, but an active participant. He was no longer a tiny speck of dust swept away by the cruel waterfall of fate, nor a mind locked within a desperate skull, but a central factor of the grand loop of creation, where the universe gives birth to the observer, and the observer, through perception, in turn brings existence to the universe. The exhausting feeling of having to confront an alien, cold reality suddenly vanished completely, giving way to a fresh, vibrant resonance as his anxiety transformed into the curiosity of a fellow creator. Now, instead of withdrawing in fear before the uncertainties of life, the young architect began to view the world through the eyes of an artist standing before a blank canvas, ready to swing his brush to paint the reality blocks of his own making with boundless courage and imagination. The interconnected web looking at the continuous waves crashing against the shore and churning up white foam covering the fine sand, the old doctor continued to guide Arthur's stream of thought even further by borrowing the imagery of the ocean to speak of quantum entanglement. He described with a deeply passionate tone a miraculous phenomenon in the microscopic world, where two particles that have once interacted with each other will forever maintain an intimate connecting thread, to the point that even if they are separated by tens of thousands of light years, an action upon one particle will still cause the other to react instantaneously without any delay. This shocking scientific truth delivered a fatal blow to human common sense intuition, exposing a beautifully stunning truth that the vast, immense physical space out there is inherently not a true separation as we have always mistakenly believed. Julian gently waved his hand into the howling wind to continue the work of blurring boundaries, caringly pointing out that the distinct feeling of an I standing solitary right here, while the rest of the world lies indifferently over there, is actually just a crude macroscopic approximation. It is merely an optical illusion, a clumsy categorization by the senses aimed at helping the organism easily navigate and survive in space, rather than reflecting the deeply interwoven nature of the fabric of reality. The invisible icy wall that had once imprisoned the young man in coldness suddenly melted brilliantly under the light of new knowledge, as he suddenly saw through a miraculous thing, which was that the isolation he had been enduring for so long was inherently not supported by the most fundamental laws of the universe. There is no oasis of consciousness that is completely broken off from the ocean of life, and the dark shadow of ultimate solitude that once suffocated the architect's heart now vanished into nothingness, making way for an overwhelming sense of complete harmony, where every microparticle making up his body and everything around him was constantly dancing and merging in an eternal quantum choreography with no beginning and no end. The eternal quantum choreography that had just opened up in Arthur's mind suddenly became more profound and graceful than ever when Dr. Julian Thorne skillfully intertwined the groundbreaking discoveries of relational quantum mechanics, pioneered by physicist Carlo Rovelli, with the millennia-old underground current of Eastern philosophical wisdom. His steps on the damp sand now seemed weightless as the old scholar slowly explained that in that miraculous microscopic world, there is absolutely no particle that inherently carries within itself absolute, independent, and immutable properties. The mass, speed, or position of a microparticle only truly exists in the moment it collides, interacts, and reflects with another system, a modern physical truth that coincidentally resonates as a perfect harmony with the profound dependent origination philosophy of the ancients, affirming a brilliantly overwhelming truth that all things only possess properties when interacting with other things. There is no moon that shines by itself without the sun's rays, nor is there a brilliantly glowing sunset sky without the eyes of a beholder. Every object and phenomenon in this vast universe relies on each other to be born, relies on each other to exist within an intricately woven, inseparable web of relationships. That profoundly subtle concept was like a cool, meditative stream overflowing through the dried-out crevices in the young architect's soul, washing away the rigid outer shell of an ego that always considered itself the center of all events and all suffering. Standing before the immensity of the sea and the elegance of cosmic laws, the paralyzing exhaustion that had suffocated him throughout those years in the glamorous city of San Francisco suddenly blew away entirely when he unexpectedly experienced a sacred moment of ego dissolution. Through the lens of interbeing and interpenetration, Arthur awakened to thoroughly understand a core realization that inherently there is no eternal, fixed entity named Arthur heavily burdened and straining to endure sorrows or work pressures. That proud or deeply wounded title of Arthur was actually not a solitary boulder fighting against the cruel erosion of time and adversity, but rather it was born and then extinguished continuously in every tiny fraction of a moment through countless miraculous points of contact with the surrounding world. His existence was shaped by how he gazed at Clara's smile, by how he typed every quiet line of programming code in the night, by how he filled his lungs with the salty, vibrant air of the ocean, and the moment those interactions changed, the Arthur version of the previous moment also quietly vanished to make way for a completely fresh version that had just been conceived. The gut-wrenching anxiety born from clinging to a permanent ego, which once made him flounder in despair, had now shattered into countless sparkling sea foam bubbles dissolving into the void, leaving behind an expansive silence within his consciousness as the young man finally freed himself from his own chains. He completely understood that he was not a lonely sculpture shoved around by the currents of life, nor an immortal core that had to endure the storms of fate, but rather he was merely a continuously flowing collection of interactions. The feeling of unreality that had clung to him like a ghost was now no longer a symptom of a terrifying psychological illness, but had transformed into a gateway of enlightenment, leading him out of the prison of overthinking to enter a space overflowing with grace. No longer preoccupied with protecting an invisible form of the ego, his mind became as light as the white clouds casually drifting in the quiet Big Sur sky, opening his heart to receive every sound, image, and emotion passing through him without retaining a single scratch of trauma. By realizing he was simultaneously nothing and yet everything through endless interactions with all things, Arthur merged into the dance of existence, becoming an endless river of perception, constantly and flexibly transforming, embracing every experience with the pure tranquility of a soul that had truly found the source of eternal peace. The game of survival as the stream of awareness about selflessness gently watered Arthur's soul amidst the endlessly lapping waves. Dr. Julian Thorne continued to lead the architect into another fascinating mind-debunking game by analyzing the fitness beats truth theory of cognitive scientist Donald Hoffman. The old scholar slowly picked up a dry branch, traced faint lines on the damp sand, and whispered that nature had never inherently designed our sensory systems to see through the ultimate true nature of the universe. If our ancestors had seen the world through the lens of quantum wave functions or intersecting clouds of microparticles, they would have gone extinct early on from information overload before they could escape the claws of a wild beast. Instead of exposing the true nature of all things, the evolutionary process cleverly equipped humans with a filter exactly like a user interface on a computer screen. Julian softly smiled and pointed out the stark yet profoundly liberating truth that everything Arthur had been obsessed with for so long, such as status, money, society's judgmental gaze, or his days of struggling in the foggy city, were actually just desktop icons of survival. Just like when we look at a blue folder icon on a screen, we do not see the complex electronic circuit boards or the dry binary code running inside the hard drive, we only see a simplified image for easy manipulation. The social barriers and pressures of success that Arthur was straining to shoulder were not immortal laws of physics or eternal heavy boulders, but were merely survival icons automatically molded by the mind to help him safely navigate within a complex herd structure. At the moment he became aware of the complete illusion of this biological machine, an immediate relief rushed vigorously through every blood vessel of the young man, entirely washing away the suffocating feeling of someone being pushed into a corner by life. He woke up to the realization that he did not need to abandon everything, flee into the deep forest, or deny the material world to seek ultimate peace. The philosophical artist smiled reassuringly that Arthur could absolutely continue clicking on the icons of work and responsibility amidst the bustling city, but now with the attitude of a relaxed gamer enjoying his hand of cards, no longer haunted by the thought that these were the ultimate truths of the universe. The reports, the unfinished projects, or the monthly bills were no longer spiritual shackles tying down his soul, but became captivating puzzle pieces in a colorful survival game. By untagging the sacred labels from everyday pressures, his mind was untied to wander leisurely amidst the secular world, immersing himself in the choreography of survival icons with a tolerant smile and absolute freedom deep within his heart. The truth of experience, the absolute freedom that had just begun to bloom in Arthur's heart, suddenly hit a final hidden reef of the mind when the phantom of simulation theory and the Boltzmann brain paradox abruptly arose. Standing before the immense ocean, he suddenly shuddered, imagining the terrifying scenario that cosmologists often whisper to one another, that in a universe drifting through endlessly long periods of time, random thermodynamic fluctuations are completely capable of assembling a single brain floating in the void. That brain would carry a complete set of fabricated memories, from the image of a mother in childhood to Clara's smile this morning, all being just a random event flashing brilliantly before dissolving back into nothingness in the next split second. Or worse, everything around him was just a sophisticated simulated environment running on some invisible supercomputer. If the entire hardware generating this perception was just a lie, if his life history had never occurred, then wasn't the liberation he had just tasted merely a cruel joke? Seeing the young man's shoulders begin to tense up again due to a new cosmic scale fear, Dr. Julian Thorne did not rush to offer complex mathematical counterarguments, but instead suddenly burst into hearty laughter. The old scholar's laughter echoed between the earth and sky of Big Sur, so generous and warm that it melted away the tension freezing Arthur's chest. Gently patting the architect's shoulder, Julian looked straight into his eyes and threw out a sharp question that broke every deadlock, asking, "So what?" With a tone brimming with the empathy of someone who had traveled to the very limits of reason, he slowly explained that the obsession with the nature of matter was inherently a meaningless entrapment. Even if Arthur were just a floating brain randomly born from thermodynamic fluctuations with fake memories, or a piece of code running on a server system, the moment he felt sorrow, the tears falling for a fake memory still always held the most authentic salty taste. The doctor emphasized that whether the material crafting this reality is lifeless silicon, ghostly quantum vibrations, or a network of biological neurons, the experience itself, the vibration of his soul right at this exact moment, is eternally an intact, unshakable truth. The pain is real, the joy is real, the love, and even the awe before the beauty of the sea right now, are all real. The final block of deadlock in Arthur's mind suddenly shattered before that simple yet grand truth. He realized he did not need to peel back the universe's outer shell to search for a certificate of origin for his existence anymore. The desperate clinging to the origin of matter was entirely erased, making way for a sacred acceptance that the subjective experience itself, and not the foundational layer composing it, is The only thing that shapes the meaning of a living being, allowing him to smile and welcome this world with all its fullness regardless of what material it is woven from. Friendly solipsism, sacred acceptance of the authenticity of subjective experience, having just soothed the fear in Arthur's mind, suddenly paved the way for another tricky logical question to sprout. If each person's reality, as Bayesian quantum theory pointed out, is just a collection of personal perspectives and expectations woven from inside the skull, then when billions of those separate realities collide with each other every day on this earth, why doesn't the world collapse into a maddeningly chaotic mess? Reading the bewilderment frowning on the young man's forehead, Dr. Julian Thorne slowly poured a little more hot water into his cold cup of tea, then raised his resonant voice to introduce a physics concept with a name so bizarre it sounded like a philosophical paradox, which was friendly solipsism. The old scholar explained that the French physicist Hervé Schwerin had offered a unique perspective, bravely going to the very end of quantum equations to accept a truth that every observer is actually residing in their own branch of quantum results. The space in the wooden cabin seemed to thicken as Arthur shuddered, envisioning Clara, wondering if he and the woman he loved most in the world were imprisoned in two parallel reality bubbles forever unable to touch each other. If he lived in a universe where his choices and experiences branched off into an independent chain of events, then was the figure of Clara he was embracing merely an illusory version drifting in his own world, while her true essence existed in another dimension far, far away. However, the former quantum physicist gently smiled, waving away that gloomy cloud with a beautifully comforting truth of quantum mechanics, which is that the structure of the universe not only allows personal realities to exist independently, but also conceals a miraculous guarantee mechanism that helps those reality spheres interlock and synchronize perfectly with one another every time there is an interaction. That if Arthur measures the world, sees a result, and then voices that result to Clara. The fundamental laws of physics absolutely ensure that Clara will hear exactly what he just said, even though she is standing in a reality sphere of her own. The personal quantum branches do not violently crash into or cancel each other out, but rather they intricately weave together in an endless rhythm, creating a solitude that is full of harmony and companionship. The concept of friendly solipsism affirms that even if Arthur or any of us is locked tightly inside our own inner world, we remain always a part of a network of closed but incredibly sociable minds. It is a socially oriented isolation, a solitude that knows how to play, listen, and coordinate rhythmically with other solitudes to maintain the illusion of a grand common objective world. This awareness poured a cool, refreshing stream over the young architect's soul, completely removing the obsession with the overwhelming loneliness of classical solipsism that had choked him in the previous stages. He profoundly understood that the distance between him and Clara was not a cold, cruel abyss separating two human beings, but was like the sacred distance between two musicians playing different harmonies within the same grand symphony. Each person is immersed in their own distinct melody of experience, but the structure of the cosmic musical score cleverly arranges for those notes to intersect, uplift each other, and create an unbelievably perfect synchronization. Arthur no longer felt sad or helpless about not being able to step into his partner's inner world to verify her existence, because he knew that the very moment they held hands, two independent universes were softly touching each other and confirming the other's presence in the most complete and beautiful way. A boundless peace surged in his chest as the young man realized he could entirely take refuge in his own peaceful solitude, while simultaneously fully enjoying the miraculous companionship of the sparkling reality spheres that were constantly revolving and rubbing against each other amidst the immense ocean of existence. That the miracle of language, the boundless peace from the concept of friendly solipsism still embraced Arthur's mind as the two men stepped back into the quiet wooden cabin, leaving behind the endlessly lapping waves of the vast ocean. Dr. Julian Thorne leisurely sat down on his familiar armchair, gently pointed into the invisible space between them, and began steering the conversation toward a miraculous everyday thing that we always take for granted, which was the power of language. The old scholar slowly analyzed the miraculous mechanism of a conversation, describing how a thought that just blossomed in the utterly dark, sealed region of Arthur's brain, an absolutely subjective neural event that no one could touch, could somehow vibrate the vocal cords to become mechanical waves of air. Those invisible ripples traveled through empty space, struck the doctor's eardrums, and were then decoded backward into electrical impulses transmitted into the brain, arousing a strangely similar meaning inside an entirely different skull. Julian smiled, emphasizing that language is not merely a dry communication symbol system, but is the greatest technology, the most wondrous machine humanity has ever built to pierce through the skull wall and combat the gloom of solipsism. Every single sentence spoken, every single word uttered carries a silent vow, a courageous wager of faith that on the other end of the line, behind the biological shell of the person opposite, there truly is a mind present to listen and understand. Like a fragile yet incredibly durable pontoon bridge built across the abyss of cognitive isolation, language allows the separate islands of consciousness to send out messages in a bottle, hoping the current of sound waves will carry them to wash up on some distant shore. Awakened by that highly poetic perspective, Arthur slowly reached into his pocket and turned on his smartphone, its screen glowing brightly to display a brief message Clara had just sent. If it were the Arthur of yesterday, he might have fallen back into the trap of cold analysis, wondering if these words were just lifeless data streams echoing from a soulless biological machine. But now, under the light of philosophical awakening, he stared at those tiny electronic characters with an overwhelmingly profound resonance. He realized that every single word his life partner sent was not merely text, but a true miracle regarding the collision between two eternally closed spatial realms. Clara's thought, from the very depths of her distinct quantum world, had been encoded into electromagnetic signals flying through space, displaying on his screen, and instantly blossoming into a warm flower of emotion within his consciousness. He did not need any mechanical device to measure or prove her existence, because the very appearance of words carrying care and novel perspectives that his own mind could not choreograph by itself was already the most vivid proof of a parallel universe existing and walking in step with him. The isolation of the cerebral cortex was no longer a terrifying imprisoning jail, but had become a launching pad to honor the miracle of communication, where every message, every word, and every exchanged glance was a momentous event of the universe, brilliantly testifying to the burning desire for connection among souls wandering the vast human realm. The leap of faith. The soft light from the phone screen still illuminated Arthur's face as he basked in the joy of the miraculous connection that had just been unlocked, when the warm, deep voice of Dr. Julian Thorne rang out once more, skillfully guiding the young man to the highest peak of tonight's philosophical journey. The old scholar slowly took a sip of tea, directed a tolerant gaze toward the architect, and gently posed a decisive question, asking what the greatest proof of the presence of another mind in this world truly was. The answer absolutely did not lie in complex neuroimaging scans or convoluted biological theories, but lay right in the very unfathomable surprise that person brings to us every single day. Julian smiled, thoroughly analyzing that if this entire universe were truly just a grand monologue entirely written and directed by Arthur's own mind, then that megalomaniacal brain would surely never create situations out of its control to trouble itself. Yet, real life constantly flows with streams of events full of unpredictable responses, like Clara's clever joke bursting out in a quiet space, a deep sorrow hidden in her eyes that he never anticipated, or a breakthrough sharp perspective that the dark region of his own brain could never mold on its own. That very unpredictability, that exact feeling of bewilderment when facing a completely alien concept springing from the person opposite, is the most radiant mark, the undeniable proof showing that there is another consciousness machine existing independently and walking alongside him. This concept awakened a fierce resonance in the young man's chest as the former quantum physicist continued to turn the page on a deeper and more beautiful truth about the nature of love and compassion. That he gently hypothesized that if humanity one day truly invented a magical machine capable of seeing through the depths of one's soul, providing an absolute scientific proof to confirm that Clara or anyone else on this earth truly possessed a fully vibrating soul, then a silent spiritual tragedy would instantly emerge. At that time, Arthur, treating his life partner kindly, devoting his complete love to her, would no longer be something sacred and noble, but would plunge into becoming a cold logical equation, a mandatory moral obligation that reason must obey, exactly like acknowledging that 1 + 1 = 2 or obeying the law of universal gravitation. The absolute certainty of empirical science would rob away the entire poetic beauty of human connection, transforming love from a miracle into a soulless reflex algorithm. And this was the moment the wisdom of the universe shone its brightest, because that very void that could never be proven, that very eternal blurry boundary of the hard problem of consciousness, was precisely the greatest gift the Creator had quietly bestowed upon humanity. Because we can never know for 100% certainty what the other person is truly feeling inside their biological shell, every single small act of care, every comforting embrace, and every prayer for their peace is elevated into a grand act of faith. The fact that Arthur steadfastly chose to believe that behind Clara's subtle smile lay an entire whole, rich universe of emotions, the fact that he decided to treat her with all his nurturing tenderness even without any state-of-the-art physical measurement standing by to guarantee it, was the most radiant and purest manifestation of free will. True love never sprouts from the barren foundation of verification, but always blooms brilliantly right on the precarious soil of uncertain doubt. To accept loving someone is the ultimate bravery of taking a grand leap into the unknown. It is our voluntary act of using our boundless compassion to fill the dark voids that the light of science can never touch. The gloomy darkness of solipsistic isolation that once besieged and choked the young architect had now been entirely dispelled and incinerated by the bright, warm light of a new belief system, the religion of active choice. He no longer harbored the desperate need demanding the universe to present a detailed report on the existence of the living beings around him, because he had found ultimate liberation and freedom in the very decision to let go of the need to control absolute truth. His heart now beat with steady, peaceful rhythms, filled by a pure love unburdened by any calculating measurements, ready to give away an unwavering faith in the miraculous presence of his partner, not because he held solid physical evidence, but because he, with all his free will, proudly chose to believe that everything around him was truly living, truly breathing, and truly worthy of being loved. Return and rebirth. The final night in the Big Sur Mountains fell, bringing a profound end. Strangely quiet peace that enveloped the tiny wooden cabin space, much like a caring embrace holding the young architect's mind. Arthur relaxed his entire body, closed his eyes tight, and enjoyed the flickering dreamy state before drifting into sleep, where the boundary between consciousness and the unconscious gradually faded away as a beautiful testament to completely letting go of the need to control reality. He no longer felt the urge to frantically check whether this world was real or not, because uncertainty was no longer a lurking threat ready to swallow him whole, but had transformed into a space overflowing with forgiving grace. When the dawn broke radiantly, the young man said goodbye to the old doctor to return to the glamorous city of San Francisco. He stepped back into his familiar office, facing the rushing crowds, the noisy car horns, and the hurried pace of life, but with a completely fresh mindset full of a sense of rebirth. Arthur was no longer a panicked prisoner trapped in a tangled mess of unrealistic fears, but was gently stepping into the world as a free participant, an artist smiling and merging into the shared dream of the universe. The immense void of uncertainty that once terrified him was now filled with compassion, pure curiosity, and a boundless sense of relief. Arthur's journey is also the journey each of us can experience amidst the rushed vortex of this era, when pressure and exhaustion sometimes make us doubt the entire meaning of life. The most profound humanistic lesson does not lie in us having to find a perfect scientific answer to define reality, but lies in a courage to accept the eternal mysteries of the universe. It is precisely in that state of not knowing that we learn how to love unconditionally, learn how to cherish the fragile yet miraculous connections between people, and realize that true peace is always present right here, right in this present moment, when we stop bracing ourselves against the world. Dear friends, if this therapeutic philosophical journey has brought you moments of silence and fresh perspectives, please do not forget to hit the subscribe button, like, and share the video so we can together spread profound humanistic values and tune in to many more captivating videos every single day. We deeply wish to know how you feel about this story, and whether you see a reflection of yourself or the real-life pressures you face within the character's journey to find liberation. Please leave a comment below the video so we can share our most sincere feelings from the very depths of our hearts together, because every heartfelt word from you is a precious puzzle piece that enriches the shared dream of us all. Finally, we send our best wishes to all the viewers watching this video, wishing everyone abundant health, an incredibly joyful spiritual life, and that every passing day overflows with peaceful and leisurely tranquility. Goodbye, and see you all again in the next videos.